Welcome to Wildcards. We created this podcast to get under the skin and to listen to incredible people that have gone on to do some pretty special things in their industries that they sit in. We wanted to speak to them about the game-changing moves that they've made, the companies they've created. We want to listen, most importantly, to the mistakes that they've made and how they've learned from them and how they've been able to create some special things within the industries that they sit in. Find out today what makes a wildcard. Welcome to episode 6 of Wildcards podcast. Today, I'm super excited to introduce you to my good friend, David Carey. David is not only a really good friend of mine, he's a former competitive swimmer and Olympian. He competed in the Commonwealth Games and Olympic Games several times, and is the founder and CEO of Track Record Coaching, where he equips leaders of pre-IPO companies with vital skills needed to thrive in this really tough economic climate. David brings with him a wealth of experience, and in the coaching world, I think you'll find this episode extremely insightful.
Well, good to sort of have you on board, David. Our new guest this month is David Carey. I've known David for about 2 years, I think now, thereabouts. David, I think it's about that, isn't it?
Yeah, that's about right.
And how do we know each other?
Seems longer.
How do I know a three-time Olympian? So we met it sounds really romantic, actually, very romantic, at a business networking forum. And this forum is all around, it's sort of like therapy for founders, if you will. And Dave and I sort of hit it off, became quite close friends. And ever since sort of hosting Wildcards as a podcast, I've been really keen to get David on board. And thankfully, we've managed to get David in his very busy schedule of jetting all over the world, including 10,000 times over to Florence over the past year or so. And the timings have just been perfect because I'm sat on the Ep.6 currently with 5G signal, which is even better. So, David, welcome to my podcast, Wildcards. Good to have you on board.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, no, it's very cool to be asked. And this is actually the very first podcast I've ever done on this side. I know. Well, the weird thing is I host a podcast called What Does It Take to Win? And I'm very used to kind of being in the very cool state of just asking questions and allowing somebody else to go for it. So this is, the tables have been turned. Quite enjoy it. Let's see.
I love that. I didn't actually realise that. So what it takes to win. So what made you sort of, I'd love to talk about that just quickly. Let's kick off with that.
Yeah.
Like what made you sort of want to start that?
Well, it was kind of the question that we started asking when I started Track Record. It was myself and Scott Gardner. He was a performance scientist for British Cycling. And he then came across to swimming, where I was an athlete. And I just totally gravitated toward this guy. He was seen as the kind of the professor of the sporting world, coming from the British cycling team, who had been unbelievably successful at the 2008 Olympic Games. And so he joined our swimming team. And a lot of people didn't really kind of get what he was coming from, but I just totally lapped it up. And the very first time I met him, he was watching a training session that I was doing, and I was smashing out this training session, and it was like 10 400s IM. It took about 45 minutes. My heart rate was averaged 182 or something. I mean, it was just off the charts. I had about 10 seconds rest in between each repeat. And I got to the end of it, and this was supposed to be like an easy aerobic welcome to the week type session. Got out of the pool and I walked over to him and I was like, "So, what do you think of that?" And he was like, "Yeah, no, really impressive. Yeah, good. Lots of effort there. But which part of the Olympic final were you practicing there?" And I was like, "What do you mean? What do you mean? Like, did you not see how much effort I put in there?" He's like, "Well, yeah, but I don't know how that relates to what it is that you're trying to achieve." And it totally threw me. It took me like 2 weeks. I was like, "You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what it takes to be an Olympic swimmer." But it wasn't until I really kind of, the penny dropped, and actually he totally transformed the way certainly I thought about training and preparation for Olympic Games. And he actually led a kind of mini revolution within our sport, thinking about, rather than thinking about what have you done and how much effort can you put in and how much training can you get done, it's actually thinking about the end in mind. What is it that you're trying to achieve? What would have to be true in order to achieve that result? And so therefore, what can you do today in order to get there? And so the whole premise, once I'd retired and I teamed up with Scott to kick off Track Record, was around actually what does it take to win, and constantly asking that question, rather than like, what do you have to do today, or like, what's on your to-do list? It's really thinking about, what does it take to win? What are the key choices? What are the priorities? And so therefore, what do I have to do today in order to get there? And so that kind of led to the podcast as well, because ultimately it was a marketing ploy, because it was like, who did we want to work with? So therefore, how can we get to them? And so therefore, let's start a podcast and speak to them directly. So it was almost kind of using our whole philosophy around the win was working with these people. But it's since grown arms and legs, and actually we've developed a real kind of passion for doing this podcast, and had some incredible people along. So leading performers in sport and business. So
amazing. And was David, your mindset pre-thinking like that? What was it before? Was it fundamentally different to what the mindset that he was bringing?
Yeah, it was unbelievably different if I think about it. Like the difference pre and post in a kind of material way. Basically, 35% of what I was doing before 2008, before Scott really started asking those questions, and after, 35% of what I was doing was not contributing directly to what I was trying to achieve. So 35% of all that work I was doing was essentially harming the 65% that was actually making a contribution. So it was really, I mean, it was a fundamental shift. So really before that, it was all about how much effort can you put in, like how much suffering can you tolerate, how many yards can you kind of squeeze, how much training can you do essentially. And then fingers crossed, all of that training would then translate into a performance. Whereas afterwards, it was much more, today, what I'm about to do is preparing for the first 6 seconds of my Olympic final. And all of a sudden, like the inspiration massively went up, the purpose went up, the connection between what I was doing today and that kind of moment in London 2012, there was a direct connection. And so actually when I turned up to London, when I was on the starting line of the Olympic final, it was like I'd done it a million times before, because I practiced it before. And actually the interesting thing was we actually relabeled it from training to practice. So all of a sudden it just completely changed all these things.
Wow. I didn't know that, actually. Even spending a whole week with you in Florence, you never told me that. But yeah, over plenty of wine and whatever else. David, I'd like to go back to sort of paint a bit of a picture to our listeners. Can you give a bit of a flavour? I mean, I've heard a bit of the story, but I'd love to sort of dig a bit more into it, like how pre-Olympics, school, like childhood, if we go back there, what was it like for David Carey? How did you get into swimming, and what was the catalyst, the thing that made you want to go into that and train and realize that actually maybe you liked it, but let's dig into it. Did you enjoy, and did you actually feel that you were good at it and something that you wanted to pursue? How did it sort of come about?
Yeah, I've done a lot of, I guess there was the story, the version that I experienced, and then there's the kind of the post-rationalization story as well. And I guess the story that I experienced, I'll start with that one. Essentially, I'm super fortunate that I was born in a city that had a ridiculous high ratio of swimming pools to population. And so
Interesting. I love that.
it was just almost in the culture. Yeah, it was almost in the culture that Aberdeen had created a crazy number of Olympians and Olympic medalists. And so actually my headmaster was an Olympian. And I think I remember at the time others seeing him as, wow, like he's on this pedestal, he was an Olympian, that's quite special. And I don't think at the time I thought, right, so therefore I want to be an Olympian, but it certainly must have kind of opened the possibility that that is a route that is possible from that position. So that was a little bit of the backdrop. And yeah, it was one of those classic examples of I went to learn to swim at the age of 3 or 4 and then went to a club, and before I knew it, I was doing morning training at, 6 and 7 years old. And by the time I was 11, I was pretty much training every night and most mornings before and after school. And it didn't seem remarkable. So a lot of my friends at school and surrounding schools were also doing that. I wasn't smashing it at like national level, but I was always, every single time, I just made it into the next level. So I just made it into the top squad, or I just made it into the district level, or I made the Scottish youth squad by 100th of a second.
Wow,
and of course, that, like being able to go into that kind of sphere, all of a sudden opens up better quality coaching, higher level of expectation, just a different level of kind of peer group. And so therefore it kind of accelerated me each time. And interestingly, it wasn't until I was really late actually as a developer. And it wasn't until I was Athens 2004, so I was 22 at my first Olympics. And it was the first time I actually represented Great Britain, whereas most kids are, 15, 14, 15, 16. That was my first experience of that. So I guess that was the environment, and I always enjoyed it. I did it because my mates did it. It felt like a really safe and happy place to be. And the biggest thing, really, I felt like it was fair. Like the input that I put in, the effort, directly resulted in a better outcome. And I just felt fundamentally that was a fair place to be. And I think it was contrasted to, I didn't love school at all. And in particular, when I was, I think it was 6 or 7, I had a couple of horrible experiences with teachers. And I'm sure, and it was just like, horrible experience. It's like standing up in front of class and just being told, you're not good enough, sit down, go on. And just the shame and embarrassment. And I'm sure it wasn't meant, but I totally basically labeled the classroom as not safe. Whereas I found swimming to be like a really kind of happy and safe place to be. But the interesting thing was that kind of sense of not being good enough followed me to the swimming pool. And as much as I enjoyed being there and thought it was safe and felt like the energy in like resulted in like a proportionate energy out, I've always considered myself just not quite good enough. And so it was this huge motivator, but at no point did I go, yes, this is really cool. It was always, okay, so now I'm at the national level, let's get to international. Okay, now I'm at international level, let's get to Olympics. Okay, now I'm at Olympics, now let's get to a medal. There was always a feeling of deficit, never a feeling of like, whoop, that's really cool. And that kind of followed me all the way through, actually, to that kind of moment of 2008, 2009, when Scott came in, when there was more support, there was that kind of Olympic cycle up until London. All of a sudden, the sport really did fundamentally shift, became more professional. And I started getting some psychology help around, like, what is holding me back? What could allow me to progress, and that kind of period was massively helpful for me.
What I find fascinating, the way you view it, is like, I've only just recently finished this book, and it's called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. Of how you recognise those, well, lots of successful people recognise them, but a lot of people don't acknowledge them because it sort of downgrades their success somewhat, in that you identified that, like, first off, your head teacher's an ex-Olympian, so you've already got someone with that sort of mindset. What are the odds of that happening, really, for any school child in the whole of the UK, let alone where you are in Aberdeen? The other thing is the swimming pools. You have more swimming pools in that area than most other cities in the whole of Great Britain, which I find fascinating. You recognise that. Yeah. You said that, like, school wasn't safe. Did you take out a lot of your focus on that entirely and just put it all into the tank of competing, doing your best? I know you said you were always just about there, but you must have been very good in order to be just about there, because you're in that top category. I suppose what I'm asking you is, like, was that your outlet to prove and show your worth, or was it sort of it feels like you're being quite casual with that sort of, when my friends are doing it, this is, I don't know, I'm just sort of wanting to dig a bit more into it.
I think there's a couple of things. One, I think it was quite a strong part of my identity. So I was known as the swimmer, and that felt pretty good to be kind of recognized for something. And there was definitely an ego play on that one. To the point, actually, it became almost overwhelming. And I remember one assembly, I was paraded in front of the whole school, and it's like, David's going to the Scottish Championships. He's representing the school. We all wish him the very best. And I just thought, holy. So I remember, like, being in the race thinking, all these hundreds of school kids are, like, waiting for this result. And I swam the race and I totally choked. I came fourth. I was miles ahead. I dived in. I was like, came down the second length, just absolutely died a death. Everybody, 3 people passed me. And there's no way I should have been beaten, really. I should have been able to win that race. And I remember going back to school just so embarrassed, thinking, all these people are expecting me to win this medal, and I didn't. And I remember kind of walking in, and I kind of went up to my mates, and they were like, "Oh, how you doing? How's your weekend?" I was like, "Oh, bad." And they're like, "Oh, right, why?" I was like, "What do you mean, why?" Like, I was at the competition, swimming, like Scottish Swimming Championships. And they were like, "Oh, right, cool. How'd it go?" And it was just like, what? You, like, if my mates didn't care, like, clearly nobody else cared. And that was such like a helpful thing for me. Like, the only person that really cares about the outcome of this is me. To the point that I actually went up to my coach and I was like, "Oh, that was so bad." And she turned around and went, "Oh, sorry, have you already swum?" And it was just like, oh, what's going on here? But it was such a helpful lesson to me that actually that stress and pressure did not come from those kids. It didn't come from the coach. It came from me. I was the self-generator of that stress and pressure. And so instantly that helped me realize that actually you don't need to have that weight of expectation from others. I'm the one generating it. So therefore, if it's just me, then I can completely change the kind of the level of expectation.
Was that a check? Did you take that learning into other competitions?
Oh, big time.
Big time. And bigger and bigger. Even when it got to the Olympic sort of stage.
Yeah.
Really?
No, I almost from that moment on, because I was literally sick before the race, and it was just, I was so full of nerves. And it was almost like that kind of tipping point of either it's going to be like this every single time, or I'm going to be able to figure out a way through it. And fortunately, and I think it was because of those people not going, "Oh, how did it go? Oh no, you were a disaster." It was very helpful as a leveler. And there's no doubt that it helped me to the point that I went to my first Olympics, and we had a head coach, a guy called Bill Sweetnam, who absolutely tried to amp up the seriousness and the pressure and significance of an Olympic Games, saying things like, any weakness you have are going to be shown up 100-fold when it comes to the Olympic Games, and you've got to be battle hardened and all this kind of. And this was running through my head as a kind of alternative soundtrack to actually stress and pressure is generated by me, not other people. So how does that equate? And I remember standing at the Olympic Games. I was in the relay. I think I was third in the relay leg. No, fourth in relay leg. And the first swimmer went in, and all the 2 weeks building up, I was like, right, when does the stress and pressure come? When does this kind of big moment happen? And I literally remember watching my teammate coming in, and I was standing on the block about to dive in, and I was like, still not happened. This is just an ordinary swimming competition. It just happens to be called the Olympics. And I just had this really out-of-body experience around, what was he on about? It's just such a weird, bizarre situation. And I think it was down to that whole idea of, actually, I've done this so many times before, and whether it was the World Championships, the Commonwealth Games, whatever else, it just was 50 meters, 8 lanes, competing against the same people. It just happened to be that more people were watching it. And it was very bizarre to me that people find this to be stressful. Yeah.
Yeah. Looking around your group of peers that you would have become known, not just your own peer group, but obviously your competitors as well. Did you see them behaving the same manners or doing the same rituals or routines? So I can't imagine everyone's thinking like that.
No, I think it's interesting because I think because of the journey I had been on, which was I wasn't always the best, and I very rarely did I, for example, win the British Championships prior to getting in the Olympic team. I actually wasn't used to that sense of having to defend me being that kind of number one. There wasn't people are chasing me down. I was always the one chasing others down. And so I think being that, I don't really want to use the underdog because I just didn't feel like it was, I didn't feel like anything, there was nothing to lose there. I was so happy to be in that Olympic team. I thought that's my dream. That's the box I wanted to tick. As soon as I'd done that, I was going to kind of move on with my life and do something else. It turned out I went to another 2 Olympic Games because I couldn't shake the bug of it. But I think I did see others who had been kind of number one in their age group and number one in their country and, going in top 2 in the world, and almost like it was theirs to lose rather than an opportunity just to kind of perform.
Really interesting. Love that sort of it's almost, in some respect, from the stuff I've read and listened to, it's those people that have gone through the ranks of earning the grit and the failures that enable them to keep on just getting better and better and better. And then the overnight success story actually is 10, 20, 15 years worth of hard work and failures. Quite often, not that I've seen it a lot, but you hear and listen to sort of these stories of these great people we aspire to look up to, sports athletes, mostly sporting people, and a lot of entrepreneurs as well, where they've been able to turn the tides because they've been in the dumps, they've been in the trenches, actually not being that number, using raw talent, if you will, as the platform to elevate themselves has been the thing that has enabled them to be the best that they can do, because they've been at the bottom and worked their way up to the top. Talent gets us so far, but I think it's those people that have gone on that level. I think Bill Gates actually talks a bit about it in terms of he was incredible at math, as they like to say. And Yeah, I'm taking the mick out of the American audience now. That's really good, isn't it? And actually, when he went to national level, he was no longer the best. He was the best in his school. He was best probably for his state, I think. But actually, on the national level, he was no longer this, and that actually really hurt. That hurt his ego. And it's at that point, I think it's called the mindset. I think all American Express employees get this book, and it's around that raw talent is nothing compared to that ethic of wanting to learn from failure to then jump forward if you were making progress. Which I find fascinating.
It's a really interesting. It is super interesting because I think it's Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck.
Yeah,
a lot of people go into.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's so interesting to see how that is used as a look. This is what you need to be. You're either this or not. And the whole concept of growth mindset is that everybody has the potential to get better, given focus and attention. And it's interesting. It's often given by learning development, or a new CEO comes in and it's like everybody's got to be growth mindset or they're out. And actually, it's used as an outcome or a behavior doctrine. You have to be growth mindset or you're not part of our gang. Now, of course, having the elements and the constituents of growth mindset, being open to learn new ideas, increases innovation, improves creativity, improves collaboration, generally gets better results, although the research doesn't necessarily follow. It does for kids, not necessarily for organizations. However, I believe, and having coached, I don't know how many, certainly in the thousands of senior leaders within organizations now, the consistent thing within high-performing leaders, so leaders that are, leading like major corporations or significant businesses, a lot of entrepreneurs have the same experience as well that I've had with them. We do this thing called track record so far. So highs and lows of your journey. And every single one, without fail, every single one has had some kind of experience of either capital T or little t trauma within their childhood that has essentially given them an experience of hardship. Now, using my example, it was, being bullied. Whether it was or not doesn't really matter. I felt like I was the victim of some kind of authority suppression kind of situation. That for me was trauma. But I used that moment of, I never want to feel that again. So therefore I'm going to find somewhere that I can feel safe. And the combination of experiencing that real kind of low, being able to kind of basically say, I never want that again. So therefore I want to avoid that feeling, which creates the kind of the run away from motivation. And in that moment, having some avenue to then use that energy and channel it. Whether that's through a mentor, a teacher, a sport, a team, whatever it might be. And they've basically in that moment learned that not only do I not want to, and so therefore I'm motivated to avoid that feeling, but I've got a way of channeling that energy into something else. And the consistency is unbelievable. Just in terms of, my parents were divorced, and so therefore I felt this, and I never wanted to feel that again. So therefore and then in that moment, I found this opportunity and found that this was the thing that I was really good at. And just the consistency of that has been unbelievable, whether it's, grandparents dying, whether it's, siblings having major accidents, or some kind of real close personal issue that they've had, resulting in that kind of moment. It's unbelievable, uncanny in terms of the consistency of that. And I really do believe that then leads people to those kind of traits of, being able to deal with setbacks, to be able to be resilient, to create that inner confidence in terms of, what is it that I can do in this situation to get me through? Because I think the alternative is helplessness or frozen or an inability. or a kind of victimhood of, well, there's no way I can do that because of this experience, whereas most of these people have had a different experience.
Just on that like topic, have you seen in your experience people like learning from those setbacks and making them motivated and driven and having that will to succeed go actually backwards? Or is it always a full momentum feeling and journey that you just sort of step off?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that we're mentioning on that one as well. One is the people I'm coaching tend to be the ones that have found a way through. So the sample group that I'm speaking to are unlikely to have not found a way through that moment. Again, that's my hypothesis. I don't know if that's true or not. But what I have encountered is people that have not been able to identify that moment, and so therefore being held back because of it. So this could be, so we do a emerging leaders program, for an example, and these are, generally mid-20s to kind of early 30s who are kind of making their way into that that kind of corporate world, have aspirations of being a leader, but are in some ways not kind of quite there yet, and anxious or worried or have insecurities around certain things, and supporting them to be able to track back to that moment and go, haha, that's it. That's the voice inside me, because that was the moment I remember, if not consciously, subconsciously. And that's the moment I never want to experience again. You can actually retrospectively go, right, okay, it was that moment. And so therefore in that moment, I was able to get through it. I was able to develop some coping mechanisms. I am able to harness that experience. And so therefore no longer does that moment have a kind of freezing power on me. It now has a motivating power, because it really has the potential both to, it has the potential both to trigger stress and pressure, both positively and negatively. So if it's always on the mind, if it's always a constant story of, if, using my example, I'm not good enough, like if I constantly told myself that, I wouldn't get out of bed. But because I knew that I was able to find an avenue that I was good enough, or that I could at least strive to be better, that is my narrative, which is certainly at the time is I'm not good enough yet. And so therefore there's this kind of constant anguish of maybe one day I might be good. But it's really interesting being able to help somebody track back and then identify what's holding them back. And so therefore, how can they reframe that moment in a way that's actually going to propel them forward?
And I imagine actually for a lot of people, David, that's quite an emotional journey, really. Because I know when I've done that exercise, we did a bit of an exercise, I suppose, as a collective. When you do those timelines, it's so interesting to sort of see how your memory pinpoints these certain things that have happened. And you could, I suppose, as an external person reviewing, you can go, whoa, hang on, whoa, what is that thing happening here? Well, that was, you know, I just remember at this time at school, it's one thing that happened. And this turned it around in terms of my thinking, or this is the point at school that, you know, someone said something to me, and actually that is the one thing I took at the whole 5 years I was there, or 6 years that you're in your secondary school. That one thing that one teacher said in that entire, how many 1,000 days I was there or whatever, has made that is the memory I've got, which is just so weird. It can be weird, I think, for a lot of people to sort of resonate that and then take that to a place where you can use it as a platform to deal with it, to move on. So school, you've got into talkers. So you've left school. Is your full-time focus swimming? When did you leave school? Just to give people a bit of a picture in terms of a year.
So left school at 1999, and then went straight to university, still up in Aberdeen, and then went to did business studies. It was interesting. As soon as I left school, I suddenly, and at university, suddenly found I had a whole bunch more time. I very much saw lectures and tutorials as optional, and somehow managed to get through the course. But all of a sudden, my swimming kind of accelerated, and then after that moved out to Australia for 2.5 years, and from there I was basically doing something like between 30 and 40,000 meters per week in the UK, to all of a sudden doing anything up to 70, 80, 90,000 meters a week in the pool. And that sudden shift again just accelerated my performance to a wholly new level.
So how many hours is that?
Basically, that's when
what does David Carey's 18, 19-year-old self, in terms of like, how many hours were you in the pool per day? Like, what did your day look like?
Yeah, it was, again, it just felt so normal because of the bizarre bubble that I was in. But it was so 10 sessions a week, 2 Monday, 2 Tuesday, 1 Wednesday, 2 Thursday, 2 Friday, 1 Saturday, each 2.5 hours long. And if we're doing 90,000, it's 9,000 meters per session. And those sessions would range between 7 kilometers for a short one that was hard to 10 that was longer and a bit slower.
Do you know what I find?
So yeah, 10.
I just it's absolutely out of control to sort of think that someone can spend that long in a pool.
Yeah,
it really is.
It's really interesting thinking back. It was just, honestly, it was so normal. You get 2 weeks off a year. Every other week, you're in the pool. You're doing that. It was not unusual to be, getting the pool opened up for you.
What was your diet like,
Day.
David, at that? What was your diet like? How did that sort of? What was it? Was it?
Not
was
great.
it? Were you knowledgeable?
Yeah,
really. Okay.
No, not great at all. So certainly around 2002, 2006, it was almost eat as much as you can, because I was still in that mindset of how much can you do, and it's about getting as much kind of training in the body as possible in the hope that that would then translate into better performance. And so I'd be eating 5 meals a day. And those meals would be everything you can imagine, pasta and everything. Whereas towards the end of my career, it was far more targeted. So although we always measured skin fold and things like that, my body fat towards the end was getting close to 4%. So I was like so lean. And really what we're constantly trying to do is create as little friction in the water as possible. And so therefore not having things jiggle around, as in fat and things like that was super helpful. But yeah, I mean, it was pretty vague early on. I mean, everything was cooked from scratch, so it was relatively good, but it certainly wasn't measured and it wasn't targeted. Whereas nowadays it's unbelievable what these guys are, how
Marginal
conscious,
gains,
how switched on they are about their diet. Exactly. And it is just that iterative improvement. It's almost exponential, actually. And it's not a surprise that the British swimming team now are probably the second best after the US, second best swimming nation in the world in terms of results. And certainly after the last Olympics, they were, in terms of the medal count, they were right up there. And it is because of the professionalization of what it is that they're doing, and just relentless search for, as you say, marginal gains.
Yeah. Do you know what I find really interesting is, like, quite a lot of my, not friends, but, people you come across, you meet at dinners or networking events. It's like there's that common rhetoric of people that downgrade someone that's in sporting because they feel they don't have time. And like, one of my pet hates is like when people say, well, that's his full-time job or that's her full-time job. And I'm like, even if that was your full-time job, there is no ways on this planet with that mindset that you'd even be able to remotely do that, regardless if you've got the freaking time or not. Like, what do you normally do on holiday? And if you switch off, don't do anything, whatever.
Yeah.
It's generally the mindset of like pushing people is like, oh, they're the CrossFit athlete, you know, because they're able to train 3-4 hours a day. Well, no, I don't know. I don't know if I believe that. I don't think that's technically true. The mindset of just being able to sort of create that normality that you talk about, I find fascinating. Like, it was normal to spend, you know, basically the amount I run a week, 70 to 100K a week, you're doing that in a pool, which is, you know, running to some extent, one foot in front of the other. But the pool, you don't move at all, and you're putting real effort in there. And it's just, you're in a pool. It's just, I can't even get my head around that sort of normality of just you know, that was what you were putting in. And that is the level that you need to be, the time, the hours spent in there, the prep, the distances needed in order to be at that level. It's incredible. Dave, so that you spent 2 years in Australia, pre-2009. Like, what was the, you know, you've got yourself in this sort of great training state. How did it sort of leave? Because I know that was a significant date for you in terms of competing. What happened pre-2009 and then after, some of the feelings that were gained on that point?
Yeah, so to give you a quick kind of potted history of the main event. So 2004 was Athens, and I was selected for the relay, and I swam the heats, and then we were a young squad in terms of the relay squad. We weren't expected to win any medals, and I remember the performance director standing up before the final session. So heats in the morning, recovery, finals at night. And we had a team session, and he stood up front and said, oh, look, you know, these are the sessions that we've got planned today. Here's the medal hopes, really kind of make sure that we're backing those guys. And then we've got the relay at the end. Yes, they've qualified third into the final, but we're not really, you know, this is all about experience for these guys. So we're actually going to swap the team around. David, you're not in the squad this evening. We've got somebody else that's going to step in. And that kind of horrible, crushing moment, again, it was a little bit like that kind of school experience of being what I felt publicly shamed. Of course, he didn't mean that, and it wasn't about me, it was about the squad. But in that moment, it felt like this is a horrific moment. And that squad went on to miss a medal by 0.8 of a second in the final that night. And the time that I'd done just a couple of months before would have got us that medal. So I was like full of like just rage, actually. And
really?
I, for the next 2 years, I absolutely just dedicated everything. I was like, I never want that feeling again. I want to absolutely dedicate myself. I want to make sure that that never happens again. And so 2 years later at the Commonwealth Games 2006 in Melbourne, I went there and probably delivered one of my best competitions, came away with 2 gold medals and a bunch of others. That experience then really kind of set me up for the 2008 Olympics. And that for me was like, and for our relay squad, was all about winning a medal. And so we absolutely fixated on winning a medal at that 2008, to the point we actually set a time, which was just under the current world record. So we would be world record holders and we would want to win that medal. So literally every single session was incredible. Like, how's our split times? Yes. On for a medal, not for a medal.
Really?
Crazy thing was, we got to the Olympic Games, swam in the final, beat the time that we were aiming for, and yet we came 5th because 4 teams did a time we didn't even think existed. And that was so painful, because basically all of us had attached like success or failure with medal or not. So even though we'd swam incredibly well,
It felt like
it was
failure.
just like total failure. And it was like the whole feeling of like, what a waste of my life, 4 years of my life,
Is that what you felt? Do you remember how you felt at that point?
Oh,
Really?
totally. Like that was it. That was completely it. What a waste of my time. Waste of energy. Got nothing to show for it. Came fifth, missed a medal by 0.8 of a second again after coming so close the last time.
The emotional turmoil,
narrative.
David. It's just like it's so out of control. 0.8 of a second. You just, in the business world, you lose it or you don't, sort of thing, in contract world. But you don't lose things marginally like that. It's so you don't benchmark it in front of everyone like that. It must have been so tough.
Yeah.
Seeing that.
Yeah, and this was a 7-minute race, so it wasn't like it was like one line to the pool. It was 4x200 freestyle relay that went like neck and neck the whole way. So that was really painful, and I knew that in 4 years' time was London 2012, and there's no way I would have kept going with that same mindset. It was just too painful to kind of constantly feel like deficit and retribution, and it just wasn't a sustainable feeling. And I also knew that I was going to be 30 at the next Olympics, and no 30-year-old had ever made an Olympic final in the event that I was going for in the 400 freestyle. So something had to change, and really the combination of Scott coming in plus working with a sports psychologist really kind of helped me reframe everything and just get some perspective. And like, it was so helpful. And just friends, like, really helpful. One in particular, he was just like, have a word with yourself. Like, you've just traveled the world for 4 years. I am having to slog away at a bank. I can't tell you how boring that is. You're living the dream. You might have come fourth, but like, nobody cares.
Yeah.
And he said nobody cares whether I'd got a medal or not. Like, of course it would have been amazing, but actually the fact is, all these good things are happening. And I was able to flip the whole narrative around rather than I'm not good enough yet, and just seeing so much evidence to back that up, whether it's missing a medal at the Olympics by 0.4 or not, turning up to a training session in the right mindset or whatever it might have been. There was constant reams of evidence to tell me that I still wasn't good enough. And yet I was able to flip that. The motto, which I still have today, which is everything I've ever done has prepared me for this moment, completely changed my mindset on this. And it meant that it felt like all what I'd done was basically a platform for me to then kind of springboard from today. And every experience, highs and lows, all prepared me for what I was about to do. And it's really interesting just how much that has changed my perspective on things. I'm way more growth mindset. I'm way more willing to try new things. At the same time, I also did my master's in executive coaching, and that almost made those 4 years almost like a real life experiment. I was using myself to try out the theory that I was learning as an executive coach in trying to create a positive working environment, in trying to motivate myself, in trying to deal with my insecurities and, unhelpful chatter I was giving myself. And those 4 years, especially the last 18 months or so, were without question like the best 4 years of my swimming career. It also happened to coincide with a whole bunch of other things, such as having the best coach I have ever had. Up until then, I realized I'd only had trainers. So essentially, a class, although they called themselves coaches, they were essentially there to tell me what to do, how to do it, how often, how long, at what speed. And I was just kind of executing based on what they were telling me. So when I stood up to compete, it was like, oh, I'm alone now. Whereas I actually had a coach who I would describe as facilitated my performance rather than told me what to do. And that, again, just all these little things allowed me to perform. And without question, performed at my best at London 2012, swimming in the Olympic final of the 400 freestyle. It was just like the perfect bookending of my career, and it was a super special experience.
Incredible, mate. Like, it's so nice to sort of hear, you know, yourself and that competed at that level, learning so much and taking so much insights from all these things that you had around you, and then taking that to like teach others. Because quite often, I know a lot of, you know, a lot of sporting athletes, performance, you know, specialists, you know, they have a theory on things, but it's interesting to see like how you've played with them throughout your life, and then reflecting on that was the catalyst that helped you get to that place where you were able to take a component of that to succeed, and then dissect that further to then obviously filter down to other people. Do you, like, what's the thing that motivates David, like, deep down? Like, is it doesn't feel like it's winning at all costs. It feels like there's a bit, because there's a lot of things I've listened and just people in my life that it, like, that is really at all costs. It's about coming first.
Yeah.
And I know with my son, like when he does certain things, I'm like, there is a learning from not coming first. It's okay to not coming first. But in your world, it really does feel like you've learned so much actually in all those journeys, not winning, and then you've elevated it to the next level somewhat.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like, what the whole concept that we use at Track Record is founded upon this idea of winning well. And because, you know, initially as an organization, we started off, you know, it's all about winning, and like, how do we make sure that, you know, we beat people? And very quickly we steered away from the fact that actually even the very thought of having to beat other people distracts you from what it is that you're there to actually try and do. As soon as you put other people into the equation, it then puts it about them and you in comparison to them, rather than being able to focus on what it is that you're trying to achieve. And so we now describe winning well as this idea that you're striving to deliver unbelievable levels of performance. So there's no drop in expectation, that there is still that high striving for success, but being able to balance that with a feeling of fulfillment, so that actually turning up to work, turning up and doing whatever it is that you're doing is actually enhancing your life, not getting in the way of it. And all of our work is around supporting leaders to be able to create team environments and organization environments to ensure that individuals feel like they are using the organization as a vehicle to fulfill their own purpose, passion, and potential in order to get to where they want to. And as soon as you're able to flip that, rather than people feeling like they're being used by the organization, or it's like, I can't wait to Friday or, you know, Saturday or whenever the weekend is, and it then becomes an enhancing life experience working at an organization, rather than something that feels quite oppressive. And so for us, winning well is quite actually a very different way of thinking, because often we come into organizations and it is as if it's a compromise. It's a one or the other. It's a balance. Either we're going to be high performing, striving for like greatness and slogging everybody's guts out, but kind of recognizing that well-being is not going to be that good, or we're going to be like all about well-being and it's all soft and fluffy, and we're going to have to compromise and we're not going to have to work as hard. And actually what we say is, no, it's not one or the other. It's both, and one aids the other and the other aids the other. And so if you can create that environment, all of a sudden you've got this kind of incredible self-sustaining place where there's high levels of expectation, where people feel incredibly supported to deliver that bar, and people are role modeling, as in people can see others, you know, they can see evidence of people living like that and working like that, and holding each other to account and not being soft and having the difficult conversations. And that's the type of environment, when it worked well, we experience in sport. Of course, in sport, it gets horribly out of kilter sometimes, and it does all become about the medal, and it doesn't become about the athlete's performance. And very quickly that nosedives, because the stress and pressure that's created in that system is unsustainable. So it's something that we go into a lot. So that's a long way of saying, in terms of the initial question, what motivates me, it is about striving. So my values, as an example, number one is striving, constantly seeking, and it's tiring sometimes, but striving for me is a really important thing. But that has to be matched with what I describe as harmony. And harmony is not just people around me, but actually me feeling quite good about what it is that I'm striving for. And the third thing's around energy, that kind of idea that I think energy is so important, being able to put energy into something that deliberately in order to make a difference. They're the things, when I get those three things in play and I'm able to dial those up, then I'm probably at my best.
I love that. I love that winning well mindset. I really like that. And I also really like that you have three values. I just really like that. I don't, when we were doing our company values for Tillo, it was, it took a lot of time and effort to do them, but actually, I don't know what my values are. I want to spend some time doing it. No. It's probably a good precursor actually to sort of, but one, I'm going to make a note and I'm going to do my own values myself, actually, for me personally. My own personal values. I might copy some of yours because they sounded really nice. And then, but, track record, I remember when you were telling me about this, it was really interesting because just the evolution of companies and how they start, they get product market fit, they sort of get some really nice traction and early feedback, they grow, and then there's this beautiful, well, I know it's quite dramatic for lots of companies, but there's this beautiful embryonic stage of a company growing up to be, baby through to toddler through to, teenager or young person to then adult. And if you translate that into business terms, it's like startup, scale up, growth stage, IPO, and all that sort of stuff. I think this is a good sort of precursor to talk a bit about track record and what you do and how you work with founders, executive teams to get the best out. What is it that you do for these businesses?
So we tend to start working. Well, it's predominantly with leadership teams. Start there. There's kind of two offerings that we do. I'll come into the second one further down, but it's with leadership teams, and it's over periods of time. And that period tends to be one of a moment of inflection. So in the days when there used to be IPOs, we would be brought in, we would do individual and team coaching with that team to support them through that high stress and pressure moment, to really kind of increase their sense of clarity in terms of what success looks like, the sense of cohesion within the team in terms of how they want to work with each other and the team dynamics, and also the commitment in terms of what is each individual's contribution, what does that look like, and how do we ensure that we support that team right the way through that phase. And so that's the kind of the majority of our work, which is we work a lot with private equity firms, both within the firms and with their portfolio companies, through those moments of inflection. So significant change. It might be new people coming in. It might be new funding rounds. It might be all of a sudden the game has changed, and so therefore that team has changed. And really what we see our role to be is when we're doing individual coaching with each of the leadership team, it's absolutely to be on their team. So it's completely confidential. It's about them being able to optimize what it is that they're there to do and really dial up their purpose, passion, and potential. And we believe if we're able to do that with each one of the exec teams, they will all then be more aware of what's going to pull them back, what's going to accelerate them, and how can they create an environment for themselves in order to deliver their best performance. That's kind of the individual coaching element. And then the team coaching, we are absolutely on the side of the business. And so it's not unusual when we work with a leadership team that actually a couple of people, up to 20% of that leadership team, decide that's not for them. Because what we're there to do is really dial up what is success and what will it take in order to be able to deliver that success. So one of the big things that we find that teams just are not great at is having a shared sense of urgency in terms of what needs to get done when and what are the priorities. And so often there's completely different levels of urgency within that team. And in the same ways, like we're trying to create this highly tuned engine that they're all working together to create this environment for the wider organization to ultimately build confidence for all their stakeholders, whether that's investors or employees or customers, wherever it might be. They're trying to build confidence. And if a couple of elements of that engine, of that leadership team, are just running at a different speed, basically that engine starts to fall to pieces. And so being able to make sure that everybody is in tune, working together at the same pace for the same goal, really kind of certainly gets me going. But it really supports that team through that kind of high stress and pressure phase. And then once they're through that phase, then we kind of leave them to it, because ultimately they've developed the habits, they've got through that tricky phase, and they're on to the kind of the next level. And it's kind of very much easier to kind of cruise at that level. So that's the majority of our work. And it's such a privilege to be able to do it, because we're really kind of supporting people having these life-changing moments, because, you know, think about founders suddenly getting enormous checks they've perhaps never had before. It's not just their role within that team is changing. It's their whole sense of identity and the circles in which they're moving and the quality of problems that they've suddenly inherited because all of a sudden it's just a different place. And so certainly for teams and individuals, one of the hardest things that we experience people to have is that change of identity. I was this, we're now this. And how can you shed what was once our narrative to then become something entirely different?
Fascinating. And did you feel as you were coming to, like, closing the chapter, you sort of closing the book on 2012 London Olympics, did you feel this was a natural progression that you wanted to go into coaching? Because, you know, there's lots of sporting people go into public speaking, they get into motivational talk. Did you feel this was an area that you would really excel in and you would do, you know, you find your life's work almost?
Yeah, I kind of did. And the reason for that is because I think it was 2006, maybe 5. I started, so rather than doing the sponsorship route, a lot of athletes try and do, and they basically kind of wear a label on their chest and turn up for days and do meet and greets and all that kind of stuff. Actually, I much preferred going into organizations and just telling stories about my career. And as much as people love, you know, seeing the medal and all that kind of stuff, I quickly realized it wasn't that was interesting to people. It was very much the story, specifically the setbacks and the lessons that I'd kind of gleaned from those experiences. And so I would do things. So, you know, as I said, I had 2 weeks off a year. So I basically know that almost immediately after a major competition, I would have to tell a story. And that forced me to immediately reflect on what's just happened. So I knew I was speaking, I didn't know the result yet. And so basically the speech couldn't be about the result. It had to be about the journey. And that forced me to really reflect on what are the stages. It actually gave me a huge amount of confidence leading into the competition, having prepared what I was going to talk about, because, you know, I'd learned all these lessons. And very quickly I realized not just telling those stories, but actually asking questions and asking them about their experiences and how they might be able to apply either similar thinking or different things. And I very quickly learned that was, in fact, coaching rather than motivational speaking. And I just absolutely loved it. As soon as, just those moments of seeing people go, oh, yeah, okay, right. You figured out that 35% of what you were doing wasn't contributing towards your Olympic final. I'm sure there's probably something similar for me. So therefore, what would that be? And being able to help people through that process was just like, it's addictive. I mean, I just absolutely love it. And that's kind of still what I do today. So I feel like I've done that for quite a long while now, that, just facilitating the performance of others and supporting others to really challenge themselves. Because ultimately, we're not consultants. We don't pretend to know what it is that the organizations are that we work for. We don't know how to invest capital. Having worked with private equity companies for as many years as we have, my investing has not improved any at all. Whereas being able to have that kind of professional distance in terms of, yes, you might be doing something very complicated and high finance, but actually ultimately it still comes down to how can you get the best out of the humans that you have, and how can you align their ambition, how can you dial up their motivation, and how can you ensure that each person is contributing in a way that's ultimately going to get that collective goal. And that's the bit. It's just so fun. So fun.
Oh, yeah. I find it really interesting just how, you can come into some of these talks and listen to certain people, but like you can really tell with you really love and believe and are so passionate about like helping others. And, anyone out there just sort of looking for help, I suppose, from a professional perspective, do check out Track Record. David's been quite helpful. I'm not going to speak about some of the clients that David's working with. Obviously, there's a confidentiality piece there, but David works with some absolutely incredible companies that I'm in no doubt that many of us use or interact with today. So it's even more personal from my perspective. But I think just sort of looking at sport and business, like as we come to the end of this really insightful chat, like what things really translated, like, because I look back at my career, especially my early career in the military, and like I've got some really interesting things that translated, and lots of people say, oh, that must have translated really well from like army to this, and there's loads of stuff that did, and there's loads of stuff that freaking didn't. What's like in your world, and like in your world, you've got in the pool that long, training, routine, all these things. What is there one or two or three things that you can sort of pull from that sporting world that you pull into the professional world, business world, and all these high growth businesses that are disrupting industries, businesses that are doing simplifying stuff for the consumer, like that you've found?
Yeah, I think there's a few things, and it's interesting. We don't often tell stories from sport within the work that we do. What we have done is just created a kind of framework and a philosophy almost, and it is kind of anchored around that winning well concept. But I think that the beauty of sport is its simplicity. So certainly in Olympic sport, every 4 years you have got this immovable deadline that you have to deliver your very best performance, and there's no shifting it. Like if you're ill the day before, tough, but they're not going to shift it. They're not going to push the deadline out. That project is not going to get an extension. So that is staying. And it's also pretty, it's incredibly measurable. So, there's no hiding space in terms of, well, I did well, but, yes, that metric might not have been great, but actually look at all these metrics, irrelevant. Like that is the result. And so I think often what we do, we come in businesses is apply that same simplicity. And often we hear, but it's not that simple, and business is a little bit more vague. Well, it's only vague if you make it vague. You can actually, it's within your control, it's within your power to make it much clearer. And actually, the clearer you make it, the more simple you make it, the more likely you are to be able to channel enough energy towards the thing that you're trying to achieve. That's one definite thing, certainly early on in track record, that we did a lot about. And I think there's two others. One is around how do you create an environment to allow individuals to deliver their best performance? And that's kind of three things that we see as being critical. Again, taken from sport, absolutely applied and refined within the business world, which is you have to have high and clear levels of expectation. So if people don't know what the bar is, or if it's not clear, or if it's low, if there's low levels of expectation, then the chances are people are not going to deliver your best performance. So it has to be a high level of expectation and super clear. The second has to be a perceived level of support that matches that level of expectation. It almost doesn't matter how high the bar is, as long as people feel supported to that level, you're likely to be able to get a good high-performing environment. But the third thing, and it's like three legs of a stool, they all have to be high and level. The third thing is around role modeling. So they have to see it to believe it. There has to be disciplines, things in place, routines in place that allow and enable and ensure that those two first things are there. So what does that look like? That looks like very clear sense of this is what I have to achieve and it's on me. I feel like I've got everything I need in order to deliver that. The things that are important. So I'm not talking about table tennis tables and bean bags here. I am talking about the training, the tools, the stuff I need in order to deliver that expectation. And I see my teammates and colleagues delivering and having conversations and holding each other to account. So if you've got that kind of team environment, which again, sometimes we experience in sport, often we didn't, that's what we're talking about, and that directly translates. And I think the third thing that we've learned a huge amount from is the use of data to calibrate and measure performance and quantify performance. And one of the biggest kind of step forwards that we've used and introduced to the business world is around measuring stress and pressure. So the biometric measurements that individuals are going through, so the literally minute by minute stress responses that they have to any given situation. And we use that within the individual and team coaching environment to basically fast track coaching. So if we've got somebody's data that they own, that they kind of share with us, that basically says, at 9:42, I had a huge stress spike. We're able to then go, right, what happened at 9:42? And it's like, oh, yeah, my boss walked in the door. And we can then go, right, what's the issue there? What's the story you're telling yourself? And it completely gets rid of the BS, allows us to then have proper targeted, meaningful coaching conversations around, it's not the coach walking in the door that's the problem, it's the story that you're telling yourself that creates that stress response. And so we're able to then support that individual to then basically figure out what's going on there, how can we change that, and how can we ensure that that's not the thing that stops you from delivering your best performance. So we're able to use data pretty effectively, whether it's in the team environment or at the individual level. So they're probably the three main things that we've translated across.
Incredible. Really interesting sort of set of rules and items that you've pulled across. I mean, it's stuff that you just don't really think about at all. Especially that data bit, like that is really interesting, like how, people are able to sort of look and think about that working week and actually RFPs, leadership meetings, one-to-ones, all these things with certain people that can trigger these responses and use that as a basis to kind of re-level it, if you will. It's a bit like you're delivering the zone thing for business in some respects, like with your blood sugar levels.
Yeah. It's really interesting. We've actually completely changed organizations' meeting structures, both in terms of like the frequency, the length, and also the content of those meeting structures based upon the data that we're capturing from individual biometric, the blood chemistry that's happening within somebody's body and the responses of that. And we're able to say, look, this Monday meeting, it is absolutely not producing any results, because nobody's you've got nobody's attention. The people are stressed. They're doing other things. They're distracted, etc., etc., etc. So therefore, going back to what is it that you're trying to achieve, and so therefore, what is it that you have to talk about, and what's the issues that need to be addressed today in order to increase the probability that you're going to achieve that result, it totally flips the meeting. Because again, having that same experience that I had, how does this moment today, how does this choice, how does this expenditure of calories impact and get me closer to the thing that we're trying to achieve? And asking that simple, basic question really helps people, rather than kind of, we always do the Monday meeting, so we'll always do the Monday meeting, and they always talk first, and we always talk second, and it always runs out of time, and it runs over, and this, that, and the other. It's shifting the dynamic to based on what is it that you're trying to achieve, and how can you contribute towards that today in this moment, and what's the best allocation of that energy.
Yeah, I really like that. One thing I'm going to take away from, this discussion is that winning well sort of approach to things, and actually personal values, because I don't think very many people have their own values. I think they have things that they believe in, but when you boil it down, like, what are you doing? Like, what is really important to you as a person? Is there any frameworks that you have used or about that can help you build out your own personal values? How did you even come up with them?
Yeah, so we do it as a key part of it's really around confidence. And once you have values, they increase decision making like so much, because you basically got this kind of natural filter, and does it basically, you put it through your values as a filter, then it kind of spits out a pretty decent answer for you often. So in terms of how we do it, basically we see values as they have to be proactive, not passive. So basically we kind of turn it into active language. So, using my example, like, I am striving, I am harmonious, I am kind of positive energy. It's being able to ensure that it is something that I do, not something that I do and something I am, rather than something that just kind of sits kind of objectively and
makes sense.
Workbook. The way that we get people to do it is basically, a lot of people probably know what they are. So we actually just get them to write down what are the most important things when you think about how you apply or what you might want to be thought of, or how do you want to kind of basically pass through life? What are the most important things to you? And we're looking for one words there. And you basically write a whole long list, as many things as come to mind. The other question, if people are struggling, is like, what really pisses you off? Like, what really gets in your goat? So, for example, if people are, if you get really frustrated when people are arrogant, then the chances are you probably value humility. So therefore, that then becomes a value. So you basically kind of do all that. We then get them to stack rank them. So identify like what's the most important down to the least important. You get them to basically scrub off as many as you can. And then you get them to put definitions next to each one, because ultimately what we live by is the definition of the value, not the value itself. And then it's about activating them. So, asking people at the beginning of the week, it's a wonderful planning tool. So, again, using mine, if I'm going to be truly striving, harmonious and positive energy, what decisions and choices will I make? What will I turn up to? Like, what will I achieve through the things that I've got this week? And what would be a great result? And then I can then use that to reflect at the end of the week as well. So as much as possible, ingraining it in the way of operating, basically how you turn up, how you think, how you basically review how well you've done. It's really important. One health warning that's really worth mentioning is that the stronger those values become in you, the more aware you become, the more you expect other people to live those values. So
I can imagine.
if people are not, again, in my world, if people are not striving, if people are not like really dedicated to being better, I've got a pretty strong turn off button on that one. So just like that's the consequence of it. Don't expect others to also apply that same way of being, because somebody else's might be fundamentally different or might be the same, but they have a different definition. So expecting others to apply that same thinking is massively unfair and unrealistic.
Yeah, that's really insightful. I'm going to say now, I think people listening to this for the first time, they basically just had thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds worth of free coaching here. That's what I sort of feel. You've been very kind, really kind. I learned so much talking to yourself. It's a pleasure to sort of say that you're a friend and someone I'm acquainted to. So yeah, thank you, David. I really appreciated it.
So I'm going to pull my wild card out here and be the coach and the host for a second and ask you, what was it that teacher said to you that you've kind of remembered from school, and how does that impact how you lead today?
Good question. So I don't think this teacher definitely didn't say anything that was out of line, I suppose, in any respect. But I remember I was on all the bottom sets at the school. So there was a lot of TA support. I say a lot. There was a couple of people in there sort of supporting people within the classroom. And I think it might have been an English class, and we had a substitute teacher in, and then there was a TA, teaching assistant, in there, sort of helping me while I work. And this was quite late on, actually. When I was talking to you specifically about your experience that you had with your school, and this one teacher sort of picking on you to some extent, getting you to stand up and talk and that sort of thing, it reminded me of when I was probably about 15 or 14. It probably was 15 actually, because I was coming to the end of schooling, and this lady was talking to me about what I was going to do when I was going to leave school, because that was quite a topical thing there, because everyone started to think about, are they going to go to college? Are they going to go straight into work? Are they working for their parents? Or whatever they're interested in. And I remember I said to her that, really, because I hadn't done that well in my coursework, I was sort of quite lazy when it came to actually trying for the exams that were coming up, the GCSEs. So she asked me, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I've already been accepted into the army. I've managed to do my exam, or my barb test, they call it, to get in. So really, I'm not going to bother with any of this stuff. I'm not in a rude way, but I just said, this doesn't help me. I've already got in.
Yeah.
And she said, well, yes, to some extent, Alex, but do you not want to do it for yourself? And I sort of looked at her, and I must have made a face like, no. And actually looking back, I feel so pissed off that I didn't. And like, I know what she means now. I knew what she meant when I joined the army, actually, because it wasn't cool for me not to try. Like, why not try for yourself? And everything around the army was all around trying for yourself. It's cool to be the fastest. It's cool to be the best shot. It's cool to be the one that gets everything right. It's celebrated to be the best.
Yeah.
But at school, it was totally the opposite. I look at my son's school, my daughter's school. Like, it's cool to be good. Whereas at my school, it really wasn't. Yeah. In fact, it was better off to be hidden at the back and not doing well at all, and just be quiet and not be seen. So I think for me, it was around self-worth, and I didn't really have a lot of it back then. And now, I've learned from that lesson and actually try everything I do. Doesn't matter what it is. So yeah, that's what I've sort of learned. So
Yeah.
interesting. Do you know what? It's actually interesting. When you asked me that,
Cool.
I didn't really know what I was going to say. And that's just kind of rolled into something there a lot bigger than I thought over 5 minutes. Yeah. Thank you, David. Mate, I really appreciate it.
There you go.
No,
Well,
good man.
you might have just found your first value as well.
Yes. Yeah. Self-worth. No, appreciate that. Thank you, mate. Is there
Thank you.
anything else you wanted to sort of finish off
Not
with
at all.
or mention or anything like that?
I think the big, in terms of what I've reflected, either preparing for or actually hearing myself out loud today, I think it's really helped me remember, like, at my core, what's important to me, and how can we as track records really kind of double down on the things that we truly care about. So actually, it's really helped me refine and just kind of re-remember all the things that are important and special about us. And so I think that's probably what I'm going to be taking away. Just that kind of real, like, sense of mission and purpose that
Nice.
I definitely have. But being an extrovert, unless I say it out loud, it probably doesn't get processed by me. So this has been super helpful. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
No, thanks, David. Until next time. No, I really look forward to catching up in person again. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. It means a lot. I know it means a lot to a lot of the people that are listening as well. So thank you, mate.
There it is. You've heard David talk about his time as a competitive swimmer. You've heard all the lessons he has learned along the way and how he's applied them to track record coaching, but also as a person and as a human. As I said, I think I speak for all listeners out there when I talk about the sort of coaching methods and some of the methodologies that he puts into his own life and into his own routines, that you've just received thousands of pounds of free coaching. Really appreciate David's time and sharing his knowledge with everyone on the podcast today. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to catch you up on the next one.